go ahead and introduce our next speaker. I first met Carol Franklin over 20 years ago now, Carol.
Yeah.
And she came down to South Mississippi when she was working with Ed Blake on the master plan for the Crosby Arboretum. Robert Poore was there as well. And by the way, the Mississippi chapter of American Society of Landscape Architects, our state chapter, has begun a student, it's a scholarship drive, a scholarship in memory of Ed Blake Jr. And for those that knew and loved him, if you want to contribute towards his memory, and I'm sure he's affected and impacted many of you in the Garden Club community as well. But we're trying to raise $25,000 to sponsor a scholarship in his name. And please contact Sadiq or myself at some point in the future. And if you want to, yeah, or now, as Sadiq says, contribute as part of that. We want to do that in his name for students. So, but I first met Carol when I was still a student at LSU. And Ed and Chris Wells invited me to join them to sit on a log together and talk about some of the design ideas that were going on there. And Carol and Leslie and their spouses began a firm back in the 1970s called Andropogon Associates, of which we have a slide here you can see. And Carol was a landscape architecture student of someone named Ian McCard at the University of Pennsylvania. Ian McCard pioneered ecological, he coined the term, I think, ecological planning and developed it in the realm of landscape architecture and planning, and wrote one of the most popular books on land use planning, which is called Design with Nature. And a review of that book, Design with Nature, was described in Landscape Journal magazine as one of the most important books of the century. And its impact is still being influenced, still being reprinted and used today. And Ian was Carol's teacher, his friend, and his mentor, and greatly influenced her work and their work at Andropogon, which started as an ecologically designed firm. Carol was also teaching in landscape architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, which she has done for over 30 years until she retired in just 2002. But because of Ian McCard and Carol and Leslie, Penn became known as the premier school to learn ecological planning and design. And in the meantime, her own firm began to grow. And while I was doing some research and interviewing some folks for a book that I'm doing on Crosby Arboretum, the Crosbys were actually looking at 3 other national firms at the time. They were also looking at Andropogons. And Carol Lynn told me that Dick Lighty from Mount Cuba recommended your firm and told them that Andropogon was the best around, only they don't know that yet. And Carol's work at the Crosby Arboretum, the master plan for it, won an honor award in design from our national ASLA in 1991. And that was only the beginning of her work, her celebrated work. She and her firm, Andropogon, have become one of the best-known design firms in the world and are sought accordingly. Their projects range not only from public gardens and recreational design, but college campuses, health facilities, urban and regional planning, and historical landscapes. And their firm's mission statement is to weave together the landscapes of man and nature for the benefit of both. And they do. Some of their noted landscapes include the Sidwell's Friend School in Washington. Taz and Jason and I had an opportunity to visit it a few years ago, where the Obama girls go to school. It's a wonderful facility. That won an American Institute of Architects Top 10 Green Project Award and achieved LEED Platinum. Andropogon was a finalist in the 2000 Olympic Games, some of the designs there in China, and have completed projects in Malaysia, Abu Dhabi, Cambodia, and many other places. And their list of awards goes on and on and on. But I think we had already mentioned a little bit about Carol's new book with her co-author David Contasta, which also just won a prestigious 2011 ASLA Honor Award in Communications. And the book is called Metropolitan Paradise, The Struggle for Nature in the City, and is a very thorough review. It's kind of what the book's about. It's a wonderfully researched review of her watershed, her area in Philadelphia where she lives. And it's actually in 4 volumes that are titled Wilderness, Park, Valley, and Corridor. And it details the background history of not only that watershed and why it's important and the green spaces and what they're trying to do to preserve it. I have read it. Carol, it took me the better part of a summer to finish reading it. And as one of the ASLA awards jurors noted for this book, and I agree that every city should do a book like this. It's a wonderful template to know our history, both natural and cultural, which I think is imperative to our future. So please give a warm, warm welcome to Carol Franklin, who has traveled many, many miles to do this book.
Thank you so much for that extraordinary introduction, and I just want to say it is like coming home, as some people have mentioned that they moved from Michigan and places like that. There is something about Mississippi, both the extraordinary people that you produce and the graciousness and hospitality that you offer to us Northerners that sometimes we worry that you must hate us or something, but always smiles in Philadelphia in the bank, and I'll just say this very quickly. You can always tell the Southerners from the Northerners. The Northerners always say, "Next!" And the Southerners say, "Would you please step up? I'm ready to help you." And it's just that warmth and graciousness that has made from the very beginning, when Lynn Gamble and Stewart and Oz Crosby all called Andropogon in, and we came down and we started to work with Ed Blake, who was then a student here, and with George Schwitzer, who was a great inspiration to the Arboretum, and Sidney McDaniels, who knew everything about the landscape and the plants and the plant communities, and was an unbelievable resource. I mean, it was such a privilege working with all the people that they gathered, and it's been such an extraordinary, generous gift. In fact, in my book, I talk about similar people in my community who, by their incredible civic activism and understanding of the importance of private donors in the American conservation landscape, really have changed the face of the best parts of Philadelphia. Very quickly, I just wanted to say that this slideshow is both too long and too serious, and I hope you'll forgive it, and we'll get started right away. It's called Place First because I called up Bob Ruzak and I said, "What's the theme of the symposium?" He said, "It's about place." So I said, "All right, that is the first thing that Andropogon set out as something that was absolutely vital to informing the work we do." Next. Understand and express the essential character of the place. It's now, commonplace. But when we grew up, they threw brickbats at us for saying this and said, "Why don't you put old refrigerators in your landscape and old tires?" Because people did not see the beauty of the natural landscape, and so much has changed. And Lady Bird Johnson and so many other absolutely influential and terribly important Southerners have been part of this movement to grasp the land as our own. I think Robert Frost said the land was ours before we were the land's. And what he meant by that was we came here as colonists and immigrants in waves and waves. And it's been very hard for us we've made America ours, but we haven't made the land our own, that you can taste it in your garden. Next. Just very, very quickly, this is one of the wonderful resources, the Living Building Challenge, which started in, of course, Portland and Seattle, where all things ecological landscape architecture and general land consciousness seem to emanate these days. These are architects, by the way, who have really pushed LEED, which is focused on what I call boys with toys, or essentially sustainable gadgetry, into a real integration. I think that's where we're all going now. It's something that we founded our firm on, this wonderful sort of dance between the green finger and the brown finger, the gray finger, whatever you want to call it, the building that sometimes sort of seeps out over the entire landscape, eroding our sense of place. Next. One of the tools that we use to understand the sense of place is just to get a sense of the structure of the site. When we showed this to the archaeologists at Valley Forge, they said, we suddenly understand why Washington chose this site. And of course, Washington was both a surveyor and he was a military strategist. He was rushing away from the British as fast as he could. He needed to gather and sort of encourage his troops. He had a German to rush them up and down in that bare middle place. He had the river to escape if the British came and actually got him. He had the hills for his lookouts to see whether the British were coming up from Philadelphia, where they were dancing and drinking. And there you see on the other side the great flat floodplain pastures where colonial farmers could bring their cattle to feed the army. There is somewhat of an exaggeration about how our colonial army was starving to death. They were occasionally hungry, but they had an awful lot of very good food. Next. Again, Cleveland. Those of you who know it, my husband said, topography is destiny. Landforms are destiny. Cleveland, poor thing, is separated by a very tiny river and a ginormous floodplain. And as you know, it's a town of bridges. It's all about crossing that thing. And of course, with the industrial era, it used the river and the floodplain very badly and continues to do so today, I'm sorry to say. Next. This is just a wonderful response by an architect to place. This is India. The clients told them they wanted them to build out in the country somewhere and just take a piece of unspoiled land. He said, no, I want to build it in the city, become part of the city, and your wonderful hills with the valleys running between them, I want to make part of my building. So Moshe Safdie, who's a famous Israeli architect, did this beautiful Seat Museum, which is a memorial. And you can see it embraces, and again, bridges. Bridges save the landscape. Respect the topography. You can cross and reach things. In campuses where the stadium are always built over a river in the valley, and everybody makes huge trails and pathways to get down to it from the hills the flat plateaus they originally built on. Almost every southern university is built on this model, by the way, an Olmstedian model. And you know, these kind of things, these bridges, could save so much of the destruction of our native landscape, which includes the landforms, the bones of the thing, what it gives it its structure, and its places for plants and soils and microclimates. Next. I'm trying to hurry. Recognizing trends. We talked about this last night at that delicious banquet given by the garden clubs. And they had a wonderful speaker who reminded us that gardening is deeply dependent on climate. And the USDA has moved its designation zones twice in the past 10 years. So that's pretty scary. And there you see the winds disturbing the pollinators. You see the range of the beech tree, the American beech, in the year 2050, where it'll be confined to Maine and a couple of places like that, and we'll have none left. And what's going to happen to places like Cape Hatteras as the sea level rises. Next. Just a very quick note. This is my bugaboo. Most architecture is made as a box. and absolutely disrespects the landscape. And we have some fabulous examples of truly great American architects. This, of course, is Frank Lloyd Wright, where the architecture is embedded in the landscape. Next. And this wonderful piney coat pavilion, which Ed Blake went out and found. What we said in the original master plan was that we would like for every plant community and habitat that is developed on the site and brought back from farmland, and it was a strawberry field and a tongue plantation, so it was quite degraded, that we would like the habitat that is developed to have a pavilion in it that represented the whole spirit of the place. And he started with Fay Jones and the Piney Woods Pavilion, and I have never seen architecture that expressed the Piney Woods so fabulously. Next. And this whole integration, the building doesn't stop at its walls, and you know, all the emphasis on saving energy and saving water, that's got to go back into the cycles of the real world outside. This is a wonderful building. I don't think it's been built yet, but it's done in Vermont, and the idea was that the inside and the outside would talk to each other, would dance with each other. The outside would not be the wallflower with some parsley around the pig. Next. And this just gives you a very quick sense of how complex this is and how the inside comes outside and the outside goes inside. Next. I have to go very quickly, it's terrible. This is just a description of their philosophy, and I'm not going to linger on it. But basically, they want to integrate everything. It's the first time architects have wanted to integrate anything but their own glorious egos. So it's a very exciting movement. Next. Next. Whoops. Go back one, if you can, very quickly. Yes, that one. I'm sorry, these things. Bird machines. No, back. I mean, forward, forward. Forward one, forward, and now forward again. Forward. That gets it. It doesn't want to do it. That was it. Very quickly, that was the Baja Temple, which I absolutely adore. I think it's the most, it looks like a jellyfish. It was built in Bahia. Oops. Now, just one back from that. It won't go? Don't worry. It jumps? Never mind. A glorious jellyfish built by an extraordinary architect. But I think that's the direction that architecture should really go in, to make these absolutely organic forms that break down those awful concrete walls and, you know, great glass plates and windows and everything that they do. Next. Yeah, whoops, there, right there, right there. This is about Dallas Arboretum and really looking at the structure of the site. Every site that you come to, whether it's a tiny backyard that is yours or someone else's, or a great big 1,000-acre preserve somewhere, has an inherent structure based on the geology, which create the bones, the rivers, which are the blood, the vegetation, which is the hair. And all of that needs to be just sketched very quickly with anything, a colored pencil, a magic marker, to get the sense, in this case, of a long, thin site with a flat top. And the earlier landscape architects had started a Paseo de Flores, which was a wonderful idea because these long, thin sites, as you can see from the arrow at the top, which overlook the river and then overlook the road, are basically main streets with shops and courtyards off them. And that's what they've got, and that's what the idea that we continued at the Dallas Arboretum. Next. And this is, again, circulation. It comes out of that essence of what the site is. Savannah, you recognize. The Olmstedian parks, which are great, rolling, pastoral English landscapes, English in quotes, and the main street with the courtyards and gardens and squares and things like that. All three organizations require very, very different kinds of sites. You would not put the Savannah grid on a hilly landscape. It would be ridiculous. And you wouldn't put Main Street in Central Park. It would completely cut it up. Those great, wonderful loops that you go around are all part of that experience. Next. And this was just a circulation at Dallas. Next. That we okay, high performance landscapes. Oh, so many wonderful cliches are coming into our landscape vocabulary, and I'm deeply grateful for them because people seem to care a great deal about what things are called, and when they're called something distinguished, landscape architecture and horticulture, which often get the bottom rung, get to be more valued. And I think there is coming a time when it is seen that the landscape, its management of water, its management of natural resources, is utterly valuable no matter how urban the landscape we're participating in. Next. So this is a very quick look at a project of ours. It's Thomas Jefferson University. It's in the dead heart of a totally urbanized part of Philadelphia. Next. There it is. This is what it looked like when we came to it. It's a garage top, which was the central part of the campus, and looked like that with a few barely struggling trees and a great deal of concrete. Next. This is the essential problem that many of our old cities are dealing with. I don't think anything the size of Starkville or anything like that is relevant, but for Philadelphia, Austin, Los Angeles, New York City, we have these combined sewer systems where when it rains a great deal, the stormwater pipes get filled up and the sewage pipes get filled up and empty into the stormwater pipes, and raw sewage is dumped into our creeks and streams. This, the scheme here keeps that many gallons of water out of the city pipe system. Next. And there's the original site. 1.8 acres, 93% impervious, so the rain does not soak in, 7% pervious. Next. And this is a site section just showing basically, this is a green roof on top of a garage next to a new building. Next. And there it is, and the water system is entirely integrated. The air conditioning water, the toilet water gets treated, and then when it's tertiary, gets put into the gray water system. The rainwater and the roof, the air conditioning is gray water. That gets stored in a cistern under the garage, and you can see the blue. And then there's a new campus on top. So they discovered a space where they really didn't have any. Next. And that's just a quick plan showing you what it looks like. And the new building there on the side. Next. Seem to have lost my pointer, which is typical. And that's the roof. Wait a minute. 1 second here. They do provide me with everything. That's the roof between the new buildings, what it looked like during construction. Next. And this is very important for a lot of you in construction management and people who have interest in that area. One of the great new disciplines that's infiltrating landscape architecture is the science of soil management. And soils are becoming a storm water management technique because highly organic soils will absorb a great deal of water, storm water, and then it's either evaporated or it's transfer-evaporated through the trees and the tree roots. So it's important in a drought flood situation, which we have a lot in Philadelphia. It either rains all the time or it doesn't rain at all, to begin to store water in the soil, even if the soil is only 3 feet deep on top of structural columns that have been reinforced to hold it. This was done by James Sotillo, and I'm going to show you a bit more about him and his firm. Whoops, Bob, I'm sorry. This just gives you a little look at the layers of soil mixes that went into. So technology is going beyond just planting plants and, you know, the structural building of elements. It's going into the creation of soils, and these are living soils so that they have, you know, bacteria and fungi and all kinds of things in them, and they're full of organic matter and very richly alive. And they said, it's not dirt. Next, please. And this is just a view from this, you know, the tops of the buildings down on the plaza after it was built. Next. And this is in the plaza. It's become the central student campus. It's also the nexus of many paths, which is the key to the success of William Penn's historical squares, like Rittenhouse Square. It's, you know, the paths are diagonal, so you can go quickly across the grid and arrive at your destination faster, so you want to cross the green. Next. And there it is at night. And they use it, next, for all, it doesn't show up, but they use it for all kinds of things. They put tents over that thing, and et cetera, et cetera. Now this is James Sotillo's firm's work, and he's particularly noted and been written up a lot for his work at Harvard Yard. Everybody knows that thousands of people walk across the grass in Harvard Yard every day, and it wears out. And of course it had very shallow root systems, and it was very trampled and compacted. And what James Sotillo did was essentially to make up a compost tea and to enrich the soils with organic matter, which was made from garbage and things like that, recycled, and has created a situation where that's the original grass with roots about an inch deep to roots about 5 or 6 inches deep. So you can imagine how much stronger it is for all those people crossing. Next. And here's what you see. This is the grass in its condition. It was quite brown and miserable. This is them spraying the compost tea on the existing grass. They changed the seed mixture too to be more sustainable. And then below you see the new very green grass after much trampling, particularly at graduation. Next. And there's Harvard Yard after the treatment. Next. This is Sidwell School. And I did just want to show it to you very quickly. Again, as part of this trend that landscape architecture is no longer the wallflower or the parsley around the pig. He suddenly is integral to the stormwater and wastewater management systems, to the educational systems, to the whole, really, the whole works at a school, and educational institutions from botanical gardens to schools are beginning to pick this up and recognize this, and that they uniquely are the people to carry this mission forward. So there it is before, and here it is afterwards, and I'll explain this system. This is the new courtyard. They built a new building in here, new courtyard's in here. Next. And this, I'm not going to explain it to you, but just to tell you that the wastewater, everything was thought out in this. The wastewater from the toilets is treated inside the building to tertiary stage and then goes out underground so it never touches the children to treatment, sand filters and treatment beds. And on top is a stormwater management catchment area, which is a wet meadow. And then there are various open water ponds for biological studies, etc. And so that's, and then the top is urban agriculture. Next. So you see why I got lead platinum. And here is the, you know, a view which you will never see in real life because real life somehow never works out like this. But there gives you the overview of the thing. And these are the various stormwater management treatments. Under here and up here are the sand beds. They're under there. And then this takes the roof water and gradually, with solar pumps it back. It gets cleaned and come back down into a little pool. Next. Next. Oop. Can you go back, or is it not wanting to do that? Ah, well, you saw very quickly that system of trays. And what forward? One more. There. These are all the trays which treat the water. This is of stormwater overflow from the roof water, which comes there, deep to keep fish in there in the winter because it freezes in Washington. And under here, under here, the sand beds which treat and filter, and up here too. Oh, it's here that the sand beds treat and filter and return tertiary treated water back into the larger fabric of the system, of the water system. Next. Keep on going, that just is a quick sight. And there you can see this very rich wet meadow. By the way, in the afternoon at 1:30, I'm just going to try to build on everything that Tim was talking about in terms of meadows, is called Making Many Meadows, and it just goes right, even shows you the burning meadows, the Nature Conservancy, the whole works. Please forgive the fact that this is about projects and larger ideas of sustainability and what landscape can be and what our sort of moral responsibilities are at the scale of our mouth and at the scale of the universe. So there is the wet meadow, there's the biology pond. Next. And these are the varieties of meadow. You saw that there were 4 or 5 different kinds of meadows possible through this. And you can read there, some are rain gardens, some are constructed wetlands which actually have treatment goals and functions, etc., etc. Next. And this is the little pond down below where the kids study aquatic life. Next. And this just gives you a quick glimpse of what it looks like underground and the very complicated engineering. This is rather like young women in the 1950s and 60s when we spent 4 hours in front of the mirror to look absolutely natural. Next. And that just shows you the sand filters very quickly. There, you can see the sand there, and the sand filters are in here, and there. They become this thing here, and this is also part of the treatment system. And this is what the sand beds look like underneath. Just to show you that there's a lot of engineering. It looks like a flowering meadow, but it ain't. Next. And then this is what it looks like with the kids. They come up and sit on this. They use the steps, of course. Here are the other steps. Here's a water fountain design that was borrowed from a man who has been looking at more, I can't remember his name, but he has done a great deal with water flow and water cleansing. Next. And then this is the kind of study that you get out there. So it's a social space, it's an educational space, and it's just a central gathering space, but it's also pretty. And it does change all year round, and it does require maintenance, unfortunately. When we started our firm, we perpetrated a terrible myth that natural landscapes did not require very much maintenance, and you would save lots and lots of money by doing them. This is not true. It's not the natural landscape's fault. It is that the world is so disturbed today, from acid rain to climate change to mismanaged stormwater, that no natural landscape can withstand these pressures for very long. Pests and diseases coming in from everywhere. So it takes the human touch to kind of bring them along. Next. Harmonize people in place. Well, that was one of the things, but landscape architecture, and especially ecological landscape architecture, does not mean no people. I used to hate to put people in my pictures. I thought they sullied them. But I have learned the hard way that people must be part of place, and place must be part of people. Whether it's a national park and an indigenous African tribe managing the park, or whether it's simply our own local urban wilderness and some of the meadows and prairies that were talked about here, or your own backyard as a reservoir for endangered species. Next. I'm going to show you very quickly something that's becoming very much a buzzword. Complete streets, 20th century streets. They've got a lot of different names. This is a road in Philadelphia, in the Northwest. This is the topography, so you can see that it's very, very steep. It's a huge hillside. Next. And this was the discovery. In Philadelphia and in many other cities, about 15% of the open space is in road and railroad rights of way, which belong to the public and can be seized and renegotiated as new ideas about managing traffic come into vogue. And so there were very many project partners, and this was really the first time the city agencies had ever talked to each other. We have a very good park system and a very Parks and Rec department and a really remarkable water department that's been very forward. They have been working together, but Streets refuses to talk to either of them. Next. So this was the division of the street into different kinds of greening. The green infrastructure, the street was narrowed, the Stormwater rushing down that street was managed. Next, here's the city agencies actually talking to each other and talking to the neighbors. It was quite a miracle in Philadelphia. In some communities, just take that for granted, and it's very special. So if you have that in your community, nurture it. Next, it's very ecological. This was what the street looked like. And it was not multimodal. It did have a bus that went up and down, but it was basically cars. The bikes were always squeezed off by the cars. Here is a little plan for regreening it. Next, and we'll show you the picture. And this is a series of stepped rain gardens which capture the stormwater runoff before the bottom of the hill, which is the Schuylkill River, which flows into the Delaware and the Delaware estuary and then into the Atlantic Ocean. So that was the notion, and it involved a great many things, from reducing the driveways to having a bicycle lane that was completely separate, to having just 2 lanes of traffic, and taking land from one of the street lanes and making it into parking spaces and parking space buffers. Next. And this is famous Portland, who began this whole thing. But one of the things that they do, which is very sad, is that all of these great gardens, which do capture rainwater fabulously and are generally very, very well maintained, is that they're all straight lines along the street. They're all the green strip. The green strip at the edge of your sidewalk has now become an ecological garden that captures rainwater. Well, there's really no need for that, because some of the streets in cities like Washington, D.C. are 18 or 20 feet wide. Chattanooga, which is 125,000 people, also has the same problem. Monstrous sidewalks, which are all concrete. And all, next, shedding rain into the combined sewer system. This was a project done by a friend, Tina Rodriguez, who has a small landscape firm, and it's basically a response to one of those great big 20-foot sidewalks. And she opens up into plazas in front of the businesses and the stores and the big, corporate offices, and she curves it, and there's benches, as you can see. These are benches. And this is the deep trench that holds the water, and it has rushes and sedges in it. And it's a very simple scheme. These are Nissus sylvaticus. Next. Healing ecosystems. It's the obvious one, and restoration has always been a part of our firm's sense of what needs to be done. After you've disturbed a site, almost every site we come to nowadays is disturbed somehow, somewhere. Find the problem, repair it as part of the garden. Next. This is a spa for postal workers that we did with Robert Venturi Associates in Japan. And it's in the forest. It's a little Switzerland kind of place, and there are hot springs in the mountains. The people next door is a golf course that took a 1,000-foot wide bulldozer and just sliced the top off the mountain to make the golf course. And this is a national park. But like England, you can do things in your national park in Japan. Next. First, preservation. This is soup to nuts approach. The very first thing you have to do is decide what's valuable and make sure your building footprint and your construction techniques don't wipe it out, because you won't have it if you do. Here we are, and meticulously Japanese, the trees whose branches were in the way of the construction equipment, but whose roots would not be impacted, were simply cut because they're sprout hardwoods. And there they are sprouting back. Otherwise, and there you see them cleared on the hill. Otherwise, the plant was dug up and taken, next slide, to a nursery at the foot of the mountain, which was an old rice paddy, and stored for 5 years. And this might seem odd, but when you realize that the natural vegetation of Japan, for which they prefer our vegetation, is Stewardia, magnolia. There are 12 varieties of azalea on this site alone. There were, I think, 10 species of cherries. It was an oak hickory forest, which is fascinating, just like our own oak hickory forests. It had tulip poplars and things like that. And it's extraordinary. Sassafras. I made myself into Dr. Franklin very quickly by simply adding Chinensis or Japonica to every tree I recognized. Oh yes, Tulipifera chinensis. I know it well. They were very impressed because they actually thought I did know it, but of course I didn't. It just looked so much like our vegetation because the Northeast Asia has all these species equivalents. That's another very interesting long story. Next, please. This was the stormwater management. Very interestingly, this site had highly erosive volcanic soils. And any time you dug a hole, the whole mountainside would start leaving. And you could see it there, how sort of fragile it is. This was the stormwater management system from the 3 hotel buildings. First quarter was taken from the pavement and held here and cleansed with willows. Then it flowed into a detention basin. And this was just an attractive visual pond that took roof runoff. With a waterfall, was cleaned and aerated as it went into the retention basin. Next. And this is the pond that actually treats the water. The Japanese, who are known for their respect for nature, never make ponds that are more than 3 feet deep. They have holes in them for the carp to go down in the winter when it gets too cold. They have only one species of fish and it eats everything, the carp. These are not balanced life ponds at all, and it took an enormous amount of time to persuade the Japanese to have a pond that was 8 foot deep and was a living, natural pond that recycled itself and was largely self-sustaining, except in horrible natural events. And of course, as you know, Japan is deeply subject to horrible natural events. Next. And this is about ecological restoration. That's the garden Buddha there, planting acorns. We did an exhibit for the Mars Arboretum at the flower show, the very first year we started. And we did all these posters. I did them with my niece, and it was wonderful fun. So we did the whole story of roots, and then we had this great root canopy that you walked under. But much more important is this that my husband said, which is that restoration and management are performance arts, where participation is as important as the results, because it is the actions, the process, which change the participant. Next. This is Crosby Arboretum and a photograph by Ed Blake in the controlled burns. And Ed Blake, what we would do with Ed is so wonderful. It was such a great working relationship. Leslie had a very strong ecological background, and she said, we have pine barrens in New Jersey that look a lot like your pine forests here, and they're dreadful because they're all managed by the government and they're burned every 2 years in February, and they look so boring. She said, but when a natural fire hits them, they look great, and in 1 year they're back with, you know, wildflowers and all kinds of species coming in that weren't there before, etc. So Ed Blake took this, he got the idea. Single, monospecific burns in the same place, the same time, the same intensity, bad idea. It makes a very monotonous landscape, and an arboretum is dedicated to be an interesting and diverse landscape. That's your goal, and that was our goal, to transform this strawberry field and ton plantation into beautiful representatives of this incredible landscape that you have in Mississippi and in the Mississippi coastal plain. So Ed Blake then went and found Dr. William Platt at, I think it was Tulane, or it was at LSU, and Dr. Platt was working on fire cycles, and he gave Ed a computer program for the whole site so that you could have fires of different intensities, a hot summer fire in the canopy, a cold February fire that just licked up the grass, a shrub fire in, the spring, but not hurting the birds or whatever you wanted to say, so that you could really manage the landscape with fire. You could manage for the species that you wanted, and I know Robert Poore is a real expert on this, by the way, especially for Mississippi. That is managing Central Park. We had a huge bicycle problem. Bicycles are very, very important constituents of parks, but like everybody nowadays, we have to learn park etiquette. And one way we did it was during the Vietnam War, we put bungee sticks in the park along the places where the bicyclists made road trails. They weren't really bungee sticks. They didn't have poison or dung on them. But we took the little twigs and we just went like this all over and made a mat that was impossible to get through. And the other thing was that returned fungi, those wonderful white webs that you can sometimes lift up the leaves and see, instead of bacteria, which belongs to prairie systems and farm systems. Our forest systems are basically fungal-based, and the idea is with old pieces of wood that are rotting, that's what they eat, to return that whole series of animals, small and large, and plants, back into the soil to create a living soil. Next. This is just about how in our practice, what we've discovered is that restoration is absolutely key to any kind of use of a park or preserved property. If you want to have people go around and you have a deteriorated site, and I live in a world where there are almost no beautiful sites like there are in Mississippi. I mean, even the Rutgers forest is mostly Norway maple at this point. I mean, this is a forest that was never cut for 400 years, and it's all vines and invasives. So it's just a constant problem in working in Long Island, where we began this idea. Next, I mean, everything is invasive. All of the Nature Conservancy lands are covered with vines and bring it. This was before, as we were cutting the invasives out, and it was massive. Almost every tree on the property was a Norway maple or an ailanthus. And this was the path system that developed. It was a boardwalk to protect the wetlands. The wonderful thing about the kinds of paths you create is they can protect the landscape. So there you see that there's a whole journey, and it steps up and down. And you would think that would keep fathers in baby carriages from doing it, but we have seen blind people, people in wheelchairs, and people, fathers and mothers with twin baby carriages going up those 3 or 4 steps to the little pavilions that look out on the lake. Next. This is a wonderful scheme that was done for Gainesville, never built unfortunately, but it's very creative architects who created this scheme moved to Alabama, I think, and some other places. But I don't know, any of you know Gainesville, Florida, the alligators walk on the sidewalk. I was so frightened, I didn't know what to do. And this was his answer. He was asked to make a bike path, and through the wet areas, he made this grid that the wetland plants can come up through, but that you can ride over. Now, obviously, you would have to have some railings at the side. I think it's much more romantic not to, but there you have it. But I just thought it was a wonderful expression of paths taking their shape and through the very special environment that they were going through, and being very imaginative about revealing that place. Next. And this is Long Island, where we're still working actually at the Ross School, which is a school we all wanted to go to. But it's in piney woods, just like this, and subject to fire, just like the piney woods in Mississippi. And here are 2 of the kinds of paths. The buildings are old factory buildings, which sometimes are torn down and sometimes readapted. And then between them, the woods and some open air facilities like amphitheaters and classrooms. Next. So the whole journey, this is the boardwalk journey that I was talking about. Those little tiny steps don't seem, despite our sort of hysteria about handicapped people, I think we should call it universal access, and understand that many handicapped people are quite agile, and in many cases more agile than we are. This was the bridge. This woman and a man, Jim Simons, who gave this property in memorial. This is along a little salt pond in Stony Brook Harbor, and everything you see here is restored. That beech woods was actually restored. The man is a billionaire. It's the only time we haven't had 13 cents a square mile to spend on a property. They spent the first year $1.7 million an acre, and that was 8 years ago. And they're still working on it. But Long Island, my Lord, it just flies in from everywhere. You turn around, and either the visitors are stealing the plants in a paper bag, Or, much worse, they're bringing in invasive exotics on their shoes, and the next day you have Mexican bamboo and all kinds of horrible things all over everywhere, and you have to get volunteers to pull them out. So it's a real problem in the degraded Northeast. We are really struggling to bring our ecosystems into balance and stop maintaining in this kind of mad way that we've had to do even to keep ahead. Next. And this is just another view of the little pavilion that's there, and then you go up through there and up steps through beech forest, and there's a little pond. It's, again, the path reveals the different potential habitats on the site. It was all, by the way, 3 suburban houses that got torn down and was covered with invasive exotics when we came there. Next. And this is the Ross School again, and these are some of the outdoor classrooms. Some are actually attached to the building where the building becomes the outside, and some are more like amphitheaters outside the building in the sort of gardens that are outside. But you can see that you can have a very elegant garden, even if it's native plant material, entirely. There was nothing from even out of local provenance here. So nothing that didn't grow within 50 miles was put back into this place. You can do it, and it's easy with the pine barrens because that's a crisp environment. The dry sand is so thirsty, it forces the trees into elegant little shapes in Japanese, and so you always have a good-looking landscape. Whereas in our floppy, southeastern Pennsylvania, above the coastal plain, everything is just growing and growing, and you're spending days and days carrying away heaps of greenery just to kind of see through the landscape, to get a good view, to see a multiple trunk, whatever. And so your landscape of southern Mississippi is a good one to do the native plant communities and habitats, and do them very elegantly. Next. This is Toronto. And when we're in this gateways, and I'm going to say that one of the big secrets of ecological heritage gardens, whatever you call them, interventions in any landscape at all, and this is cold and snowy and miserable, and this is the division between the town and the gown, and they don't speak to each other, on and on. Every problem that you've ever had with the university and the town is here. They went through months of wrangling to get this gateway. Finally agreeing on this, which was designed by my husband and is mostly covered with green and has glowing lights at night, which are the sign for the university. But what it did was make this porous, this permeable wall between the two. So it said, yes, I'm a sacred precinct, King's College as it turned out, but no, you're not forbidden from coming in here. You're welcome. This is a gateway. This is an entrance. This is announcing our presence. And so that was the purpose, and I think it finally did satisfy that. And it's very important to do that. If you have a garden you want to protect or a park, there are not enough gateways and signals of entrances and saying behavior is different when you get in here. Expect something different. Next. This was just to show you that this business of place really is real. This is Dallas, Texas, and the Dallas, Texas Botanic Garden on White Rock Lake. This was their relationship to White Rock Lake, as somebody said, 2 city parks, adjacent to each other, separated by a chain link fence. Next. So that was the solution. And again, warm southern colors, this wonderful yellow limestone that is the native geology there, and really working with using the wall as a way to satisfy the Arboretum's need to have paying customers. So you can't come in from the street and the park, but you can look into very specific articulated views so that you can share the Arboretum, and the Arboretum's done some planting on the outside of the wall, again, to begin to sort of entice the neighbors and to give a gift to the larger area and to connect them to the lake and the city. This whole business of connection, such an ecological idea, and it's brand new. Campuses and parks were building walls around themselves to keep everybody out. Visitor-friendly is a brand new word in everybody's vocabulary, as is user-friendly. Next. And this is the Morris Arboretum. It is a Victorian garden. It has things like an English park and a series of collections of Japanese gardens, all woven into an English pastoral landscape. So the hardscape vocabulary has really taken the vocabulary of Victorian ironwork. Next. And beauty is more than skin deep. You all know that, and you know how hard it is to be beautiful. We have more opportunities nowadays with facelifts and new teeth and everything than we ever had in hair dyeing. We can do things now we never could do. And the same is true in the landscape. There's all kinds of opportunities from soil on. Next. And always to remember that creating a memorable place is the goal. And what the other speakers have been saying is that you can do that if you can draw on the social, cultural, and natural heritage of a place. It just strengthens and layers everything you do, and makes it better than the individual person. It brings the community, and it brings the natural community, and it brings the sky in. It brings whatever vegetation grows there. It's such an enlarger of purposes. And so there you see learning, entertainment, aesthetics, and spirituality. Where they all come together in that blue place is the sweet spot. And that is what we're always hoping to make. Next. Very, very quickly, this is the end. This is a garden we did for another rich person. It's the only two rich people we know, unfortunately. This was a garbage dump in Greenwich. It was what is called an ephemeral pond. It was just a hole in the woods on a 14-acre property. And this was the end of it. This was the end result. With that waterfall being made, and you'll see how, with a copper pipe which was drilled into that rock. We had a lot of zoning and sort of civic issues because groundwater mining is very big in Greenwich, and people make these awful suburban ponds, expose them to the sun, and they're basically spring-fed, and all the water evaporates. So they were extremely anxious not to let people build more ponds. Next. So that was the garbage dump up there. That's what it looked like. You can see the rock in the distance, hidden. And I call this rediscovering a place because, nowadays with such a disturbed landscape, one of the things that we really have to do as a professional, as a lover of gardens, as a love of open spaces, as a love of the larger landscape, is to discover the potential in things like those prairies that Tim showed us that, needed a little work to make them absolutely dynamite beautiful. And look at that, you'd never have thought that that could be that. And next. There we are. Again, this is the girl in the 60s, all this work to make it look like nobody did any work at all. Edges, edges, edges. Edges, transitions are the key to great ecological gardens. They make them look ordered instead of weedy. So how you treat your edges, if you put little rocks around your pond, and statues of geese, much as I love them, you will get a sense of suburban untidiness. And the naturalness will look unnatural and feel very ill at ease. You need to make these gentle transitions which feel exactly as they should and reflect the conditions of the site. So on one side we have a wetland which recharges when it rains, the water overflows the pond, which is lined and doesn't holds water, but when it's allowed to flood, it floods over the edges into a wetland, and that wetland recharges the groundwater. And so it's a continuously recycling forested pond, so you're not getting the sun evaporating the water. Next. And this is how this system works. The sump pump pulls up water from a spring underneath. It was just a seeping spring. Pulls it into a sump pump. The water is pumped to the fountain, and then it pours over the rock and fills the pond. Next. And this just shows you the very different conditions. And the thing is, as Robert Poor was reminding me, nature is dynamic and continuously changing. We can work with that, or we can work against it. It is one of the reasons why we say that natural landscapes are lower in maintenance, and they are for that reason. If you're going with the flow instead of going against the flow, you generally put in less time and effort. It's just that we have a huge flow of man-made impacts. So there you see that in different conditions it's doing different things. And there it is in spring flood at the edges. Next. Economy of interventions, the very last set, and very small. And it's just that economy is such a good Protestant virtue. And I think sometimes we feel very Baroque and don't want to do it. But as we move into harder times, it's amazing what the client is forcing you into not doing and to do. This is the New York Botanic Garden next. That's the historical forest, which is at the core of the Botanical Garden and along the river. I think it's the Bronx River, but I'm not sure. Next. This is a concrete bridge which is impeding the stream. This is a dreadful looking path, which is as ugly as they come. And this is going through this forest that they are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to restore to pristine condition. So the next problem became how to make paths that enhance the forest experience. Next. And that was the condition of the paths, as you can see, that they were soggy, wet, they were taking hillside runoff, etc. Next. And this is the new path, a new surface which was developed by our contractor. Again, answers come from the most unexpected places. And to build the bridge, which I don't have a picture of because I haven't been there since it's been built, we use this kiln-baked wood so that no insects and no rot would eat into the wood in the very wet Northeast. But at the same time, it has no poisons that have been put into that wood, which will leach into the forest, which is an exemplary. So there are these little fords that we created to catch the water and pull it across. And there you see the rhythm of the fords in the worst places. We also have made little mini watersheds with, very small bumps and dips, etc. There are many, many things, little gutters on the side. But this just shows you a couple of the things and the changed look and feel of the path. Next. And then these are the steps we put in where they had a muddy hillside going up.
What is that material?
That's Wissahickon schist, which runs in a great band from New York City. Actually, this is Wissahickon gneiss. It goes as schist and gneiss. It runs all the way from New York City through Washington's Rock Creek Park and through our Wissahickon, which the book is about. Next. And lastly, just to say it's our sacred duty as a landscape architect or interested horticulturalist, gardener, whatever, just as a lover of the landscape, to change our relationship with the ugly and the familiar. And then the last slide is just, I think, our logo. Yes, thank you so much. And I hope it will go out and season by the plate. Does anybody have any questions? I'm very happy to answer them.
What was
Informal way or informal
in
way?
the last paths that you showed? Was that just a soil stabilization mix?
No,
the actual
it wasn't.
paths themselves.
It was soil stabilization. It has 6 inches of gravel fines, interlocking, and then, not round pebbles, but wing pebbles, so they can interlock.
Yeah.
And then it has a wood chip mix, because they wanted to use wood chips. But in order, we said the wood chips look hideous and they're slippery, and they're these great big chunks of wood chips. So the contractor ground them up into this wonderful thing that looks like sand. And he put it down, it's all locked together, and it's fantastic. It's just keeping the water out unbelievably.
So it's
nothing but just wood chips from their own property and their own trees.
Wow.
They make this stuff now.
Oh, that's great.
So that, again, it was the contractor who came up with this. All we could do was say, can't we come up with something better?
I was asked for those that are going to the Bio-Refresher program that continues this afternoon to immediately go to the North Auditorium, just outside the door here, and there's a lunch break and we'll continue there. Thank you all so much for everything.